Yeah, hi everyone. I'm here with my good friend Arti Chandra, right? And we've known each other since many years at Institute of Functional Medicine. And
Hmm.
you are a family physician, is that correct?
I am.
And you do
Yes.
integrative medicine. So how did you first get into medicine, and then how did you get into functional medicine?
Okay. I Getting into medicine came via knowing I was a people person in high school, wanting to engage in some way for a sort of human betterment. And I was a psychology sort of pre-med major in college. And it was kind of through my activism, those college years, political activism stuff, that I found myself constantly interested in the health issues, like in Central America or South Africa, and also around women's health and maternal and child health. And so, at some point, taking a medical anthropology course, I learned about the field of public health, and I thought, wow, this is what I want. I want, and knowing that I may go on to med school, I really wanted that framework of understanding health promotion, disease prevention at like a population level. So I did that. I did a 2 year degree in Master's of Public Health, and then went on to med school, almost at the encouragement of professors, faculty in public health school, saying, we need public health minded physicians. And so if you're kind of set up to go that route, go for it. And so, yeah, that's how I ended up in med school, and got really engaged in the American Medical Student Association, which is kind of was a spinoff or a departure from the AMA, and they sort of were dedicated to teaching medical students the other side of medical education. So, humanistic medicine, ethics in medicine, integrative medicine, global health issues. At that point, we even had like a computers in medicine task force because computers were just emerging. So I was very engaged at a national level with the nutrition and preventive medicine task force.
Hmm.
And so, it just was kind of furthering my interest in disease prevention and health promotion, with, that having kind of been my thread since college, like I mentioned.
So you went from public health policy and wanting to then do private practice. That's kind of a big jump.
Well, I actually didn't do private practice until last fall.
Oh,
I've been a provider. I went to a inner city residency program in family medicine, and that was very, in family medicine, of course, it can include prenatal care and delivering babies. So I chose that as part of my path, and I trained in an inner city program and stayed working in an inner city setting for a number of years after finishing residency. And then when I joined a larger health system, I was in Chicago post residency in the inner city. So inner city Seattle, then inner city Chicago, then back to Seattle. And eventually I started recognizing that my interest was very strongly in more integrative approaches, recognizing that our kind of pill for every ill approach in medicine and being kind of a gatekeeper for referrals and imaging was not what I wanted, and was not what really brings health to patients and families. And so I was started dabbling, and I took like Alan Gaby's course in nutritional medicine, and dabbling in various courses that were being offered back then, and but stayed in an urban environment, and always have had an arm of working with the underserved, although my population broadened here in Seattle to Microsoft people and Boeing, and but
right.
also working with Medicaid, and then so I stayed in the system for over 20 years.
20
And it was
years.
only last year that I, in this kind of later, maybe quarter or less of my career, I'm kind of pivoting into some other areas, but maintaining my practice in functional medicine.
Did you get burnt out in the system? Did you feel like you weren't able to serve people as well, or did you just feel like you wanted to go deeper? Well, because different.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. I mean, the deeper started happening from within the system. And actually, I was fortunate that I was known in the system. And so when I heard about functional medicine, which was, I think my first course was 2005, I came back all excited, and my colleagues just kind of let me start practicing, even though they had no clue what I was doing behind closed doors, and they just kind of let me do my thing. And what happened is they started referring people to me, and then I pivoted into being kind of more of a per diem type doc, and I left OB, I left doing inpatient care, and really started focusing on functional medicine within the system.
Within
And
this.
then the system actually then asked me to go to a new clinic they were starting in an Amazon building when Amazon moved to the headquarters to see that part of Seattle. And so they said, listen, this is clinic's a petri dish, go there, see what you can set up with your functional medicine work. And so I was able to build a small but kind of mighty program. We had a 1-year waiting list within the system, insurance-based. We got to do a whole variety of testing, pretty much all the testing we wanted to for functional medicine labs. And so, yeah, I was there. I did that, altogether about 15 years, but really core was probably about 11 years. And however, it wasn't ideal. We were always a little bit like, the foster kid that, people didn't know what to do with, and they were always shifting on the business model of how to work with us. So it was challenging always. We gave countless PowerPoint presentations to this leadership, and the new leadership would come in. We'd have to prove ourselves regularly, even though we were, checking off the Press Ganey boxes of patient satisfaction and keeping our rooms filled and, having that 1-year waiting list. They still were always challenged with what to do with us. And so towards the end, when some new leadership came in once again and didn't get it at all and really wanted us to go back to the regular old high production, high volume practice. Oh, but you can do your functional medicine in that kind of thing. I just thought, been there, done that. I'm not doing it again. And I know this is my work in the world, and I'm just going to go figure out how to do it differently. So, none of the other health systems in Seattle were really, really embracing the integrative or functional care fully. University of Washington started a small program, but they weren't really ready to expand. So that's when I first moved to a small integrative practice with chiropractors and acupuncturists and naturopaths and nutrition. And it was great. And, I just decided they were moving in some directions that were different than where I was moving. So I was like, all right, I'm going to try this private practice thing. And that's what I started last fall.
Okay, well, fantastic. So let me ask you some questions, because I always wonder, when you were in the conventional allopathic system,
Yeah.
where obviously you don't get the option of having as much time, and you don't have as many options with lifestyle approaches. You were implementing them. Were you frustrated at all, or you were just able to go with the flow? Or
I'm generally a go with the flow person, so I'm very
personality, right?
I'm very tolerant. I'm very good at meetings, and I really, really believed in trying to offer this care in a system. That was my foundational belief, was this should not be fringe. This should not be out there in, some of the certain pockets of Seattle. This needs to be, this is science-based. This is sensible medicine. I'm not going to, suck up all the patients from the practitioners. This is just a small subset of people that deserve this care. And how nice for this to be on the palette of offerings, right? We have neurosurgery and orthopedics and all of these things that are big money makers. What's wrong with having this? So the foundational thing was just that I believed that it needed to be a part of the system. And I loved being able to provide this care, obviously at different levels based on what people can do, but always met people where they were with regards to, whether they were high-end executives or, a low-income employed insured patient or a Medicaid patient and Medicare. Like, so I got so fed by that widespread offering, and I just believed in it. So that's why I kept pushing and kept my tolerance until I was no longer tolerant.
And then you had to leave.
Yeah, I just thought I didn't have to. They said you could be a regular old primary care and insert your functional medicine in there. And I said, the best care comes with when we have time.
Yeah.
Most of the healing happens just by being a listening provider with knowledge. And, half the healing happens just from that. And if you can't give me the time, then I can't stay.
Right.
Prior, I had leadership that gave me the time. We had 1 hour new patient visits. We had half hour, 45-minute follow-up. So we had champions for a number of years that allowed us to have that model of care. But the new people came in and said, no.
Did you have any problem with compliance in that model?
I would say, thus far with the private practice,
no, but the institution.
No, well, I'm comparing, like if I'm comparing with thus far private, like we had pretty good compliance.
Okay.
And I think it's because we spent time, we educated, we explained, and that to me brings engagement in, and that brings in and a lot of times we'd say, you know what, this test is going to cost you $300 if we want to do it. And so people might start a little piggy bank, and maybe they would do the test in 6 months or 9 months. And then we'd work on lifestyle measures, the foundations in that time. Maybe, obviously with dietary changes and all the different, foundational aspects of health. So compliance, it was all right because we just met them where they were, and they also didn't have to worry about paying for their visits, and so they could then have a little more potentially available for some of the interventions or
right. It's like, for me, it seems like it's two different worlds. One where the institutional model is very generalizable medicine, where clinical trials are done with the generalizable model. Applications are very generalizable, just based on a diagnosis code, not really on the patient.
Yeah.
And then you go to world of functional medicine, where it's all individualized and totally different. And now you have usually a highly compliant patient because they're paying cash. Like two different worlds. And most people have a hard time, but I think your personality is very nurturing, and just go with the flow. And you were doing mostly lifestyle medicine in that setting, right? Not as much nutraceuticals or things like that.
No, we did quite a bit of nutraceuticals.
How did you end up doing nutraceuticals in a setting like that? Was there any issues?
Well, we weren't stocking supplements. We were, although they had, like in their bariatrics program, they had supplements for sale, and we were moving towards that. We actually were, where they were going to let us have a dispensary, and but we were first Emerson and then Natural Partners, and then it became Full Script, and so that's what we used. And being in Seattle, we actually also have some great local supplement shops, and so we could send people there, and so we didn't take any cuts, being in a big system for ourselves, although we were, we would have moved towards that, where that profit would have come back to the program. So we were set up actually for some good stuff until our champions departed for various reasons. So
it seems like,
yeah, and Mark Hyman came, and he gave a big lecture, to all staff meeting. He came and gave a wonderful presentation, of course, on our behalf, to try to win some more leadership support. And Jeff Bland being in this area was also, showing up at some of our meetings to speak to our vision and the value. And so we had some good things going for a while, but it wasn't meant to last, unfortunately, at that time.
Is that center still working there, and is that integrated?
No, it's gone.
What do you think happened?
Well, it was really the leadership saying, like, you have a dedicated RN. We need your RN to work in the primary care side of the clinic and help everybody else out also, not just you guys. And we couldn't survive without dedicated support. And you have 2 patient service coordinators. We're going to let you have 1, not 2. So just chipping away at our program, and then also saying that we needed to go back to the shorter visits. So yeah,
it seems like if you have a champion, you have a chance in your institution. If you don't have a champion, it's very hard to get things done.
Exactly. I mean, look at what Mark Hyman meets the CEO of the Cleveland Clinic, right, at a dinner or something.
Yeah.
And the CEO says, I'm going to do this. I'm going to take this. And, they still have the Cleveland Clinic Center for Functional Medicine, which is wonderful because they had a major, major champion. And then, of course, they got lots of philanthropy. So that helped too.
Of course. So, when you look at the patients you were seeing in an institution, a conventional institution like that, did you see a point where there's so much polypharmacy with the patient that they just couldn't recover with functional medicine approaches? I mean, I'm sure you can always do some lifestyle things to do some things, but as far as like significant health gains.
Yeah, I mean, definitely polypharmacy gets in the way, right? Like there's so many people on chronic steroids, right? How can you fix a gut when you're on chronic prednisone? Similarly with meds for the neurologic system or for mental health, right? Those can also kind of get in the way. But I feel like what we had a number of Medicare, we had a large Medicare following, people who are older who say, I don't want that. I want this. Like, I'm sick and tired of the fragmentation and one medication after another. And so we had this opportunity to work with elders and, people who'd been around the block and work with them to slowly start chiseling away at their med list. And we were often successfere at that. And we wouldn't necessarily bring it down to 0, but we were very successful at carving out various medications, mood support medications, by way of healing the gut, working with the adrenals, working with trauma, partnering with people in the community, practitioners of different types. Like we were successful. And in fact, in this private practice of mine, it's very hard to work with Medicare, right? So I didn't start off working with Medicare, but now I'm a non-participating provider, which means they can actually pay me cash at the Medicare rate, which isn't bad for a time-based visit 99215. And they pay me and we send Medicare the invoice and they Medicare reimburses the patient fully. Okay. So I'm back to seeing this 65 plus population because my goodness, like, where are we heading otherwise, like for our elders, right? With our aging population and the cognitive issues that we're seeing. And so it's a really nice time to see somebody. I mean, obviously earlier the better, but for those that are already there, it's a really nice offering, the systems biology approach.
So you mentioned that steroids were a variable that made things very difficult to turn around patients. Were there any other drugs when you would see them when the patient was on multiple medications, you thought this is going to be difficult to change besides steroids? What are the
Mhm.
main ones you were seeing? Like you would go, oh, this is going to be hard.
I'd say chronic pain medications,
Okay.
patients with chronic pain, patients with a variety of neurologic conditions that, we know are probably related to certain imbalances, like even something like a Parkinson's disease or, you know, uh, what is it called? Like just those, like, or even moving into things like chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia, right? They're already on notable medications that may be just partially helping them. Usually they're not helping, they're doing something. And so, yeah, I would say the neurologic, the psychiatric, the gut, were probably the main ones where, and I'm sorry, autoimmune, of course, right? People already on biologics,
Right.
people already which doesn't mean you still can't help them on their biologics. But the concern there is, right, is like if you are on Humira and you stop Humira and you get worse, you can develop antibodies against Humira, and then it's not going to work in the future, right? So that's a big messaging that comes from the providers prescribing them. Like, look, you could go off, but this is what's going to happen if you may not be able to be back on it in the future. Are you sure you want to do that? Kind of thing. So there's this fear, and I can't know, right? I can't know for sure what's going to happen for a person. So it's, your hands are tied a little bit, but, one of the things we definitely saw was instead of getting their Humira every 2 weeks, they could space it out to every 3 or 4 weeks, right? And so that's a huge cost savings, either to their own pocketbook or their insurance, the health system. And then some people who were willing to give it a whirl to be off of them because maybe they're having side effects or they're not getting the degree of benefit that they were told they may get from it. So
the term people are throwing around is the term defensive medicine, which is not preventive medicine, but legally defensive medicine, where some practitioners are choosing to not make calls because they think they would put them at legal jeopardy or board complaint or something. Were you ever concerned with, let's say, a cardiologist put a patient on a certain medication, and let's say you're not a cardiologist and you went against the specialist for the medication they need and then go off. Were you ever concerned about that? Do you think it's a real concern for practitioners that practice functional medicine?
yes, it's
Okay.
a huge concern. And
How do you deal with that?
I think we have people in common we know who have been, in trouble by their boards and things. I think there's really value in creating a network of specialists that you kind of befriend and you collaborate with as best as possible. Sometimes you want that, but it just doesn't happen. Everybody's so busy. But I would say that I felt protected because of one, the relationships I built with specialists over the years, and that I would consult them. I would say, listen, here's what we're doing. Here's some of the science on that. Here's what the patient is dealing with being on the medication. And, here's a path that we can take slowly where we taper the medication off, not just chuck it. And, so it has to be done strategically and thoughtfully and carefully. And sometimes the patient's just done with being on this or that prescription. And so then it's all about, and no matter what, it's about documentation, right? It's about documentation that you have discussed. They are well aware of the risks of stopping. They are choosing to stop, that you have recommended that they first discuss this with their cardiologist, that yes, you have some offerings for them. And I'm really good at like finding the right article and including a link in my note, like there's research on this, blah, blah, blah. Here it is. so that were my notes to ever be looked at through a legal lens, like I have backing. I think that's really valuable to do because, the vast majority of what we do has science behind it. And so, and maybe we don't have science on the whole model as much as we'd like to have, but there's research on the components, right? There's research on leaky gut. There's research on, also
Right.
probably,
But
right?
I think the fear is there's research on some of these things, but it's not standard of care. And the concern is like, it's not, why are you not practicing standard of care? This puts fear into some people, and then they're kind of paralyzed at what to do. And
yeah, but I think when you combine the patient's desire and you're recommending they speak to their provider, and you're making sure they're aware of the risks of not being on, and you're supporting what you're doing with some data, it's more justifiable. And when you acknowledge that though this is not in the standard of care, this is I am I'm supporting the patient's path so as not to have serious complications from being off their medication, right? Based on this science. Now, I mean, that all being said, there are patients that I wouldn't do that with, right? It depends on the individual, the circumstances, and or, say, listen, go think about all this. I recommend you go talk to your GI or your rheumatologist. And then if they come back to me saying, I stopped it 2 months ago and I never went back to the specialist, I just stopped, then I work with them from there. But yes, Tatis, you're right. I mean, there are risks in this. And I think I was fortunate myself to have built good relationships, to have built a reputation, to have, to care about my documentation, to care about communication with people's providers. And that's where like our nurse was handy and our 2 patient service coordinators, because they would, at least spend the time getting the calls made and getting the appointments made. Like if you don't have that, it's much harder to do that collaborative care.
It's totally different too, being in private practice now, right? You people you may not know, whereas you kind of knew everyone in the institution you're working as a team with.
Yeah. No, it'll be different. It'll be different. And already like the docs have changed and my generation people are starting to retire and, so there's all these new specialists that I've never met or don't know. And so, but I usually actually ask my patients to meet with their providers while they're working with me and let them know what they're choosing to do. And
that's a good strategy.
So it's not shock. It's not shock to the provider if they show up at some point and they're no longer on this med and I'll tell you, most often the providers are like, oh, you mean your blood pressure didn't go up? Like, wait a minute.
Right.
So I've actually had specialists call me and say like, what happened here? Like, what are you doing? And there's a neurologist that sought me out around MTHFR and saying, tell me about MTHFR. Like, what is this? And what can I do? What should I give? This was back in the Deplin days, right? When we're just using Deplin. And he's like, what's the dose? And, what's the test? And where can I?
You could build your whole practice when you reach out to other practitioners, other providers, and show the respect of, hey, this is what we're thinking, this is what we're doing. Get that communication open. Because they're looking
I get referrals from
all the time, right?
Yeah. I mean, just here and there. But
you just started, I mean, into your own private new area of practice, right? Okay, so one of the things that you're passionate about is soil and health. So can you elaborate?
Yeah. Well, so right, our medicine, functional integrative approaches, is obviously so based on food as medicine and gut health. And, I found myself sitting there talking to patient after patient about this. And over time, myself being educated around the fact that our vegetables have 50% less nutrients than they did, back in the 1940s and 50s, and asking kind of why, what is going on with that. And, recognizing that many of my patients, though eating healthy, though, doing everything right, we're still having nutrient insufficiencies and symptoms related to that. And so as I started, and I've always been interested in toxins and health. I was on the board of something here in Washington called Toxic Free Futures, and recognizing, and learning more and more about the role that chemicals play in our health and the value of detoxification, avoiding the chemicals, all that. And so bringing that to the food system and waking up increasingly. I mean, I've always, since I was in public health school, recognized the modern American food system is injurious to health. I mean, I wrote my freshman rhetoric paper on, the American food system. And the first line of my paper was, if you are what you eat is true, if that saying is true, we're a society that's in trouble. And so I got all that. But what came to me more, let's say in the last 7-8 years, through my own learning, thanks to other providers out in the community, that I have learned from, Mark Hyman's work with Food Fix and others, and Daphne Miller and Zach Bush and others, I, really recognize that I can't sit here and educate people about food unless I'm also working with the quality of the food that's coming in. And for years, I've been committed to educating people about the microbiome and the value of prebiotic and fermented foods, but then started recognizing that, wait a minute, if the soil microbiome is shot, which it is for the most part, like that translates into our guts. That's a contributing factor to the loss of our own microbiota diversity and numbers, and that it's all interrelated. And I also am an environmentalist. I've been active in various things over the years around that, and all those three just intersected together, right? Toxins, food, climate, and recognizing that a large portion of climate change is happening because we are not sequestering carbon from the atmosphere into our soil as we're supposed to be. So it's just full circle back to public health, disease prevention, really recognizing the skyrocketing rates of chronic disease, that we are not turning that around despite all the advances in pharmaceuticals and devices, and majority of those numbers are not decreasing. And so why? And what is that? And that's all the modifiable lifestyle factors, but you have to incorporate in that nutrition section that we learn in functional medicine that we can only go so far unless we change the way we're farming and we're growing our food, and healing the soil that grows our food, and concurrently helping the planet. The interconnectedness is powerful. It's powerful. And I feel like it should be a foundational piece of learning in all healthcare practitioner schools of this and that. And it should be something we all unify on and work together on, because we can only get our communities so healthy. We can't get them healthy without changing our, the food system, our farm bill, all of that.
But this goes into a deeper issue of health policy versus, the average practitioner going, I'm just trying to get my patient off soda. I'm trying to get just my patient off gluten. You can't talk to them about soil. We're not even there. Right. And if I start that discussion, I would tell you, I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
They would go, where do I grow? I'm not going to grow my own food. It's not possible. Besides growing your food, what are the options? Do you tell your patients to shop at or organic store, or is that even a factor? Or what do you do? Is there farms that
Well,
you?
those are really good questions. You're right, because not everybody's going to like just jump up for joy that I'm talking about this with them and engage. But yeah, I mean, because of our understanding of systems biology and how our microbiomes are so easily injured by chemical toxins, by stress, by so much, right?
Sure.
Like we know that. And so what we have to encourage organic when possible, farmers markets, and we have to encourage, maybe if it's possible, to think about growing even a portion of your own food. Like even if you live in an apartment, you could, maybe there's a container you could put on your little veranda. And even if a portion of your food is clean and healthy, that's going to help your biology, your own internal ecosystem. And not everybody can do it, but if it's better to eat more vegetables that are non-organic than not eat vegetables, right? So I promote that. Like, okay, if you can't do organic, just please eat more plants, more variety. But if they can, make even small shifts, and more communities have community gardens. A lot of the food stamp programs, they offer that you can use tokens and things at the farmers markets. So it's about tapping into what's available in the community, being able to share with patients what's possible. There's good information around eating healthy on a tight budget. Online, there's quite a bit there.
Is the farmers market guaranteed the soil is better? Is it a typical?
No, you might still be getting chemically grown foods at a farmer's market for sure. So then it's like, but it is often more local, and that's really important too, that we help our climate by supporting more local everything, local products and things. So I think for people to understand that, we're each a part of this larger web of each other, as well as of our environment, and to just, even if they just developing a small appreciation for that and can make small choices here and there. Many people come from cultures where they get that, right? A lot of the immigrant populations, a lot of the African American community, the Latino community, and then all other communities, like ancestrally, we know like that food grown from the earth is better than food in packages and plastic and things like that. But it's just a slow educational process.
Sure.
When people understand slowly, that's better than not understanding at all.
So how would you make the best soil ever?
So the best soil ever would be one that has never been chemically adulterated. But for soil to be healthy, if it's a farm, what the regenerative agriculture principles are, which are, that's the name we're using, but it's just old traditional farming, which is basically, the adage is feed the soil, not the plant, right? Like, who knew? Like, I just figured a carrot will always have all the vitamins and nutrients that it just has it. But no, the only way the carrot gets all that is through the microbes in the soil, bringing it to them. And so you feed the soil, not the plant. So the way that it's shared that soil should be treated is, it should not be left barren in between seasons. It should be cover cropped, so that the crops that lay over it like a blanket slowly release as they degrade their nutrients into the soil. That the soil is not tilled, because tilling disrupts all those mycorrhizal networks that are in there doing the job 24/7 below our feet all over the planet. They're helping create, there's a huge ecosystem down there that is there for a reason, to feed the trees, feed the plants, feed the animals, all of that. And so no-till, cover cropping, rotating plantings, because like as we see in the big bread basket of America, like you drive through Iowa and Illinois and you just see, hundreds of miles of acreage that's just all the same thing, right? All soy, all corn, all wheat. And it's been like that for decades. That has been also contributed to a depletion of those soils such that the yields are getting less and less. So then what happens is they have to use more chemical inputs to help push the yields. And then the soil gets further degraded and eroded, and then there's more chances of flooding because healthy soil holds water. Dehydrated, disrupted soil can't hold water. And that's another part of kind of the impacts of climate change. So those are and then animal grazing also, kind of properly done, is also really, really good for the soil. The walking on the soil, the eliminations, into that's all fertilizing naturally. So those are kind of the fundamental tenets of healthy farming. Mostly known as regenerative agriculture right now, but there's a few different names for it for the same thing.
You know Ari Risto-Vijdani, right?
Oh yeah,
of course. So I remember talking to Risto once ago. I go, Ari, let's say tomorrow you became really sick. You had the most debilitating autoimmune disease. You had a chronic disease, unnamed disease, no one could figure out. What would you do? He's like, he's from Iran, because they go back to a small village in Iran and just eat the food there that my genes are used to, and just stay there and recover, or maintain. I was like, okay,
wow,
from an adult's point of view, it makes a lot of sense.
What an answer! That's incredible, coming from the amazing scientist that he is, right?
Yeah.
All the access he has to technologies and healthy food, and it makes sense.
So, do you encourage your patients to have their own little farm, or what do you do? Just say eat organic? Like, how does this translate to a clinical office appointment? What do you do?
Yeah, well, I mean, I do start with their microbiomes as kind of the most important relationships to cultivate in their lives. And that I'm big on prebiotic foods, so I explain that, like what the role is, like that. Everybody knows you're supposed to eat a lot of vegetables and fruits, like everybody knows that, right? But why, right? So explaining the why can be really, really helpful. Like, we're starving our microbiome when we don't eat a diverse diet from I call it an earth-based diet, right? It's just like, if it grows or is of the earth, it's more meant to be in our bodies than if it, comes out of a factory and boxes and packages. And so the why is really important, that prebiotic foods, the fibrous foods, and the diversity of colors and nutrients, which of course, we all learned also from Deanna Minnick and her focus on that, which has been so invaluable. But focusing on that. And then I'm also a big proponent of fermented foods. And I teach people how to make fermented foods. It's so easy. It's so easy. And it doesn't take that long. And it's cheap. It's a head of cabbage, hopefully organic. It's some high mineral salt and 15-20 minutes of your time kind of thing. Like, right. So and then it sits there and then it ferments and then you open it and then, but of course it's what's that phrase? Anyway, most people aren't born loving fermented foods, like acquired taste. That's what I was trying to think of. So then there's lots of ways to hide it and blend it into things. And, there's some cookbooks out there that I recommend that. And I live in a place where you can easily buy it, even at a standard grocery store, you can buy the fresh stuff. You want to get the fresh refrigerated type, in the, like where the refrigerated salsas are, not the kinds that are sitting on a shelf, because those often have vinegar in it. Once you put vinegar in, you're not, you destroy the bacteria.
Mm.
And there's kefir, and there's, and I promote, like, learn how to make yogurt. If you like yogurt, like, homemade is way better and much higher in bacterial density than store-bought, because over time there's a loss in numbers. And then there's kombucha, so there's all sorts of ways, tempeh. And
so as a clinician, are you finding it important to do a microbiome evaluation with like a test, or do you just, these are just general principles of health that you just want to teach to all your patients, unrelated to getting any specific diagnostic test?
Yeah, both. Again,
Yeah.
meeting the person where they are. I really do like getting a test if I can. Particular ones that I have found really helpful. I really like having that information. I think it's useful, and it's
Which panel do you like? You can say.
I can say, okay, I for many years I worked with diagnostics, which was the first, one of the first early tests. They're based near here, and then I started doing more and more Genova, which I still do a lot of their tests, but I moved to the GI map, and it's not perfect, but I feel like I've been able to, I've seen more positive outcomes reacting to the patient's findings than I have with other tests.
Yeah.
Like what the findings are, and then my intervention seem to help more people. So that kind of tells me there's some accuracy here. And it is PCR based, right? And it's not always perfect, and we don't always get exactly where we need to get.
Yeah.
But most of the time we do.
You think they're reliable enough? Pre and post dietary lifestyle challenge? In what period of time?
I mean, the reliable, again, just like I said, it just depends.
Like, how would you wouldn't necessarily, for example, you wouldn't put someone on a diet and a week later test. Like, how long do you think it takes?
Oh, no. I mean, it depends on what treatment plan we're instituting. Like if they have H. pylori, I have a botanical regimen for that. If they have a parasite, if they might have both, they might have candida, or they may just have dysbiosis, right? So the repeat testing depends on the treatment regimen that we're doing. And I don't even always retest. If the person is really a lot better, just leave it at that. I mean, our biomes are always changing. We're always getting exposed to this and that, bugs. And so my goal is with patients is to really create a resilient gut, right? So applying the 4 or 5 hour program based on results initially, and really building from there. And, because we're always going to be like going to somebody's wedding and eating differently than we might otherwise, or we're always going to, maybe we're traveling to somewhere where we get exposed to a bug. But how can we create a resilient gut with a healthy lining that if we do get exposed, our bodies handle it?
Right. Yeah, I mean, resiliency seems to be the key thing for general health and longevity and everything.
What's that?
Resiliency is such a key factor.
It is. I mean, it's all.
So you also mentioned that, you're noticing with your patients that do eat well, they do have micronutrient deficiencies that you notice. Are there common micronutrient deficiencies you notice? Are you doing testing for that? What are your experiences with them?
So I often reserve micronutrient tests for later, because if you do a gut test and a micronutrient test at the same time, and you see all these gut imbalances, then you work to fix those. Well, your nutrient levels are likely going to change. You probably are going to absorb better and assimilate better. And so I just find, like, why do that twice? Like almost everybody with chronic issues needs, let's say, some gut work, or maybe they need adrenal work, like all those things that impact nutrient levels. And we want to improve their diet so they're ingesting more nutrients. So it's a test I do maybe a third to a half the time. I'll do a lot of just serum testing of the usuals, right? Like most of us do, the B12, some of the B vitamins. Vitamin D is absolute every time. I want to know the levels so I can advise how much to take and how much that may be playing a role. Iron studies and ferritin. So there's a lot you can do on just the mainstream labs and fix the gut, calm the system down, all the different ways to promote assimilation and dietary changes, and then check if they're still having migraines or, major fatigue or whatever it is, then check. Because then you're seeing what the levels are with a healthier kind of internal framework. That's my philosophy, my approach.
Sure. Thank you for sharing that. What are your experiences and thoughts about, well, why not just take a multivitamin? Should everyone take a multivitamin despite eating well? What do you recommend?
Yeah. And then
on a multivitamin issue? Is it a microbiome first, then multivitamin, or what are you doing?
Yeah. No, for me, it's gut and microbiome first, and stress reduction and diet. For sure. I mean, I think a good quality multivitamin, it doesn't hurt. But sometimes I want higher levels of certain nutrients than a multi will allow for. So, I'm just picking and choosing. And what is this person capable of doing right now? How many things can they take? And so the multi may come in because they don't want to take more than 2 or 3 things. But if they're willing to address things more with kind of proper dosing for the particular situation at hand, right? Like if they do have an MTHFR mutation, let's say, or I'm presuming that based on their family history, their ethnic origin, their, clinical scenario, then I do probably want to do some higher dosing than would be in a multivitamin. Like if they're clinically depressed or severe fibromyalgia or fatigue, or.
As a clinician, is there like a routine panel you do on most people, or you start with lifestyle interventions first? Do you have a routine testing you do with people, or kind of just see what they've already done and then kind of go from there? Or
yeah, again, it's depending. Sometimes, right, patients come in with all these records, and so I don't need to. I don't want to repeat if it's been done in the last 6 to 9 months, or so. But yeah, I mean, my panel will include some of the usual. A CBC, part of what I'm looking for there is, their MCV, like they could be not anemic, but they have a high MCV, which is telling me about B12 and folate potentially. I'm looking for eosinophils. That could be a suggestion of an intestinal parasite. And then, of course, white blood cell count or anemia, if that's going to show up. And then the CMP, again, just to look at, do they have a little bit of elevation in their transaminases or any suggestion of any kind of biliary disruption, again, depending on what's going on for them. And so I think those are, basics. I always like to see, it depends again on the person, but the full thyroid panel, which you have written so well about, and I learned from you. But, getting the TSH, free T3, free T4, reverse T3, and both antibodies, and at least once. I used to chase the antibodies, but have realized that They don't always correlate with what's going on. So I don't think that that's necessary. Depending clinically what's going on. And then like the vitamin D, like I mentioned, potentially B12 folate. And, if there's something autoimmune going on, then the ANA, rheumatoid, CRP, ESR, in that direction. So really all like a lot of the basics can be very helpful. And then maybe an advanced lipid panel, one that's looking at risk there if it's the right patient for that.
Yeah, it's a shame.
They
Like
tell us a lot, right?
when you look at the field of functional medicine, how much underappreciated just routine blood work is.
Yeah,
And it's
I
like
know.
you go to these conferences, they're just filled with all these different exhibits of all these different functional types of testing. And then people that don't get exposed to it and they're like, I'm so frustrated, I don't know what to do with it. It's like it's all standardized. Like pick up any book.
Yeah.
Like it's not anything.
Well, now there's all these direct to consumer labs too, and people pay an arm and a leg for them. And it's like a CBC and a CMP and all these things that could have been covered by their insurance, or they didn't have to pay for this whole package of things. Like I'm a little bit disturbed by some of what I'm seeing. At the same time, if somebody doesn't have a doctor or lives rurally and it's easier to just get a home blood kit, like there's scenarios where it could be useful. And but mostly I think there's a lot of startups and stuff jumping in on all this and finding ways to make money. Oh, we'll tell you your results and then we'll recommend our supplements.
Yeah. But even nowadays, it seems like the major players like Quest and LabCorp are making cash direct tax to patient access so they can get
They're moving there too. You're right. Even the big ones.
And no protocols that are given, just the numbers. So what number of supplements do you think is too much? Like, do you have a limit? What do you do? I mean, every practitioner is different. Is there a certain number of supplements you recommend? You go, oh, this is kind of too much. Like, what do you do with that as a clinician?
Yeah. Really hard to answer because it depends. And I mean, there are those patients that come in on 40 or 50 things.
Right.
I don't know how they managed in a day to make it all happen, but they do.
Yeah.
And they're very committed to it.
Yeah.
And I feel like then my job is to see if they're open to paring down on them and creating less of a need over time and kind of having them recognize the parallels of polypharmacy with polysupplement.
Yeah, polynutraceuticals.
Polynutraceuticals. Yeah, exactly. I mean, what what we want is polypharmacy with an F, right? Like
Very interesting the way you said it, because you said, I want to see if they're open to it. Says a lot about you as a practitioner. Because you're like connecting, you're making it very safe. I don't have those skills. I just go, listen, you can't do this. You're stuck in a house. You take 4 supplements. What do you take? And then we cut it off. So it's a good little rule. So I'm sure they'd be happier seeing you than me.
Yeah.
Skills, I don't think everyone can, but it's good to see how you did that, because that might be a better approach to say, hey, what are you open to? And then see what they say.
And I can put my foot down with people. Of course. I can draw my lines or say, listen, this is
too much.
More than I can work with, or yeah.
So we always finish these interviews with asking a question. What advice do you have for very skilled practitioners that have been doing this for a while?
Yeah.
What advice do you have for people that are new? And maybe even so with your background, physicians that are starting to dabble in functional medicine, but they really haven't made that big leap and they're not sure when to do it or how to do it. So start with the advanced one. What would you recommend to advanced practitioners? What word of advice?
I'm probably speaking to people who already know this, but I would say focus on the basics, don't forget to focus on the basics. Like we can, and I saw this happening to me too over time, like, well, what if it's mycotoxins? We've got to check for that. And we've got to check a tox panel,
Right.
and we've got to check because you want to know everything at once, right? Oh, let's get an IGNX also, just in case that's operating. And, so literally people walk out with a huge bag of test kits, and often a huge bag of supplements. And, so there's both the tolerability up from the patient's part, them burning out, them being overwhelmed with results. And then there's also like, and I did this. I ended up going full circle.
Everyone goes through. It's part of the process.
It's part of, so then you've answered the question.
No, but you're right. I think it's a good thing to point out. And I think people get more skilled, they do exactly what you're talking about, just like being precise with what they order. And
part of the problem is a lot of practitioners create business models where the lab tests are ordered through the business, and so there's a little fee for doing that, and it can just be hard to separate out the keeping your doors open and the business side of things with the care. And sometimes some people feel like capturing everything at once is better, because in case they don't stay with you, then you've like kind of like there's all of that.
There's a lot of the nuances.
Like true service to the human being is meeting them where they are, slowing down, honing down, remembering that really, like, to me, and I'm sure to most of us, like, there's no chronic condition that doesn't happen by way of the microbiome, right? Like, the microbiome is involved in almost everything. The research is showing us all sorts of neurologic conditions. And so it's so critically involved in all our biochemical processes that so often, like even with a chronic Lyme patient or mycotoxin or a COVID, somebody that's had a vaccine reaction usually the reason they've gotten where they are may have started with that impaired protoplasm, of the gut, as well as some genomics, and to also not forget about the role of stress and trauma in people's lives and in contributing to why their conditions are perpetuating the psychoneuroimmunology of that. And so, like, I've just really honed in on that arena, gut microbiome stuff, oral microbiome, and chemicals. Like, I'd say that's.
What advice would you give to traditional medical physicians that are very interested in functional medicine? They're dabbling into it. They want to take the leap. They're not sure what to do. What you've been through it.
Yeah, I think there's thanks. There's all types, like, and some people are just, if they want to go full court press, right? And they just, okay, I want to be certified in a year. And let's say if it's functional medicine. And my feeling is, and what I advise some of the students and residents I work with or other providers who are thinking of moving in this, is just kind of slow and steady wins the race. Like don't rush it, dabble, or just start slow. Like, people will do the GI module, and then a few months later they're doing immunology, and a few months later they're doing, and they don't really have time to really nourish and nurture the learnings that they got from module 1, right? So like, to think about the value of really exercising your learnings over some time before bringing in kind of another perspective. And of course, they're all related and they're overlapped, right? They're systems, but I think I see a lot of people in a hurry. And there's this sense of like, I want to be certified. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you're going to burn yourself out, or you're going to end up not being able to serve your patients well because of how fast you went through. And now you've just got this tag, like that may not be worth it. I was fortunate to be in the certifying group that as IFMs just started the module. So as they rolled them out, I took them, but there was sometimes a year or more in between the next module. So I had that time to like exercise my learnings. So that's one thing I would say. And I would say that it's, to me, it's like what I should have learned in med school, right? And I wanted to go back to my med school and knock on the door and say, like, give me my money back. Like, this is what I should have learned. Like, this is true medicine. And, so you can't go wrong. Even if you're staying in a conventional-ish setting, you can apply this. I mean, I did that for years before they started giving me longer visits and things like that. Like, you can apply a lot of the foundational principles from all the modules in different ways. It's harder and it's a drag because you want the time with your patients, but you just have multiple visits. Like, okay, we're going to take 3 visits to talk about the microbiome, or 3 visits to talk about what your sleeplessness and your stress is, how it's contributing to your libido or your joint pains or whatever it is. You just do it over time. And sometimes actually patients ingest that well, they ingest it better like that too. So the toolkit's amazing. The IFM, right? Like just having those handouts and toolkits, having resources for patients. I also think
I've never used them, so I don't know.
Pardon?
I've never used any of them, so I don't know.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, I also think that learning from the industry leaders out there, the labs we use, the supplement companies, and the webinars and seminars that they give, oftentimes that's really practical information. Like sometimes it can feel more take home for a particular condition than going to, the major conferences.
Yes,
so
for sure.
It's one way to kind of get your feet wet too, is just set up a few accounts, start, listening to some of these talks.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time and your wisdom. Appreciate it very much. And
Sure.
I'll see you.
Great to be here. Yeah.